Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about everything under the sun as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I am Mo Berkner-Boyd. I am the founder of the Moxie Exchange and the Everyday Inclusion app. I'm a white woman, mid-length red hair. I'm wearing some fun frames. My bookshelf is behind me. And I want to start this particular session. I don't do this all the time. And if you want to go back, we had a whole session on land acknowledgements, but it just feels really right this week in particular to acknowledge that I'm sitting on the traditional and current lands of Arapaho and Ute. There's a lot going on with water rights right now. There's a lot going on, whether it's what's happening in Atlanta with Stop Cop City. So I think one of the things that I had learned in that session around land acknowledgements is it's not just about the history, it's about the present. And it's about the future. So all of us really just thinking about and acknowledging where we sit and what we can do to be a part of solutions moving forward. I'm super, super excited to be joined by Dr. Violeta Garcia today. She and I met, I don't know, how long ago was it?
Maybe 7-8 years ago or so?
Yeah. And just have continued to cross paths and stay in touch. And what I love about Dr. Garcia, and I am going to be calling you by your honorific because particularly, right, for Latina women, we have to make sure that we are owning that. I won't even get into some of the politics around that. So Dr. Garcia, please introduce yourself. And we're going to be talking about design and systems thinking as it relates to DEI, and share your background, because your background is so important to how you approach this work and how you can help others think about approaching this work.
Absolutely. I'm Dr. Violeta Garcia. I come from the people of Central America. So that is the land that I left behind when I immigrated to the United States. And I do reside in Denver, Colorado now, but it is the lands to the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and the Ute tribes. So thank you for that. I think one of the fascinating things about who I am as a person, and you're right, as a Latina, I think there's 1 in a million or so with a doctorate in the sciences. So that is definitely something I use the label to my name as a label of opportunity and what's possible, rather than as I'm higher in accomplishment of education. I think that's a differentiator, because to me, I am Violeta, and I also want to show people that it is possible to acquire, to really figure out what you want to do and pursue that, right? And I think that's one of the things that I think make me unique. I was trained as a scientist, and I love nature. I love how it can inspire us to see patterns, to see disruption, to see life in a whole different way, for us to really take the moment to learn from what's happening in the world, and to say, the world, it'll be just fine without us, right? But what can we learn from what surrounds us, because we are part of nature, and how can that influence our work? So I took those same ideas and I founded my company, Ecosistema Design. So we help build better people systems. And part of this is really looking at where we're at. What are the systems that we currently have, and what are they creating? Oftentimes I hear people say our systems are broken, but the reality is that the systems are working just as they are. Oftentimes they're not intentionally designed, though. It just kind of happens the way it is because we've always done it this way. So part of the work that I do is really looking at how do we create intentional systems to produce outcomes that are beneficial, and really centering women of color at the center, because we are the ones that are impacted the most. And we see that right now with the tech layoffs. We're impacted when it comes to environmental issues. We're impacted when it comes to societal issues as a whole. So I love working in the STEM field because of that, because it is an opportunity for women of color to make more money to be able to reinvest in their communities. And we know that if you invest in a woman, you invest in pretty much her entire community. So that is what I do. And thank you so much for having me here today. This is so exciting. It's been a really interesting journey to get to know you. I think what brought us together initially was kind of that STEM connection and looking at inclusion as a thread throughout. So I'm so thankful to still have you in my life.
Well, and what I love, Dr. Garcia, is how you have taken what would seem, for some people would seem a completely different body of work. Biology, right, was your
ecosystems, yes.
And applying that thinking to DEI work. So let's talk about that. So systems thinking, and I love what you said in terms of people are saying, oh, our systems are broken. Your systems are designed inappropriately for the outcomes that you want, if you're saying that, because the system is working, the design of the system is wrong, right? And that's something for folks to really think about.
Well, and the nuance there is that a system produces what it's intended to produce.
Right.
That's kind of like at the bare bones.
Full stop, right?
It's producing what it's intended to produce. The question is that what you want for your organization? Right? Because if we say this system, and tech is a really good example, we have young, a lot of the image, right? The young white male IT kind of go-doer, like we have an image in our head, right? So the system is producing IT companies that have a young male leader at the forefront, right? And we see that through the venture capital and investments, that we are not investing in our Black and brown communities. I think it's like some ridiculous small percentage, right, that goes to communities of color for venture capitalists. So that is kind of a good example of that system is producing exactly what it's intended to produce. The question is that what we want, right? Because if not, then we have to be intentional about redesigning it so it produces a different outcome. And so that's where strategy comes into play.
Yeah. So for example, if I'm an organization and I'm saying, oh my gosh, we're not bringing in enough folks from marginalized, underrepresented groups.
Start with your question, right?
Start with your system, because it's not that, right? The way you've designed your recruiting and hiring, you're getting the outcome that the system is designed for. So what do you need to, and we always say, look first for not if there's unconscious bias, but what is the unconscious bias, right? And how you can interrupt the bias in that system.
Well, and bias is a really fascinating thing because we have, behavioral economics can teach us a lot about the DEI work. And you can add all the other extra letters too, because it's such a complex issue, right? We can't just separate it. We have accessibility, we have justice, we have, belonging, all these different pieces of the puzzle. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I think is fascinating is that we oftentimes don't think about, if we center the most marginalized community members, right? That design can help other members of the community, but it doesn't work the other way around. And I think
right, it does not work the other way around. You and I talked about this, right? That how often even the disability community is not even in people's DEI statements, not even a part of, right? So if you want to focus the most marginalized women of color with disability, right? Like start there. Like so many of us benefit. Great example. So many of us benefit every single day from inclusive design. Have you ever used a ramp, right? With your, you've got your luggage, or you're going into a hotel or an airport, or have you ever used a curb cut, right? All of those things were designed for disability accessibility, but everybody benefits. So I would love to hear some other examples that you have in terms of designing designing the systems for the most marginalized, where everybody wins. It's not taking, I think that is so much of the center right now of the politicization of this work, is that somehow it's taking away versus designed in a way that everybody can rise and thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the disability, when we look at disability, even the push, for the door opening automatically, that's another great example, right? If you have access to that, whenever you're carrying anything, I do a lot of training, always,
All the
with
gear.
your card. Yes. And so looking at what does it, if I can push a button, right, and it allows me to come in, yes, it's really my own need, right? I'm carrying a bunch of things, but it benefits me because it was designed with a population that is absolutely necessary for them to have that, right? But it's not, for me, it's a benefit. I'm benefiting off of this system in a way that creates access for all versus the other way around. And sometimes I think about and the reason why I so appreciate centering women of color is because we have different, oftentimes, and, I'm going to make a big general statement, but oftentimes we have childcare responsibilities and parenting responsibilities, parenting our own parents, right? Because once they get past a certain age, our culture really is we take care of our elders, and it is really like if I say to my parents, I'm going to put you in the nursing home, they will literally die right there, right? So there is if we think about the workplace and how do we design the workplace to be flexible to that, that's a whole nother conversation. But guess what? Flexible workspaces benefit all, not just parents, not people who just have, elderly parents or young children. So it's another good example.
I think that's, there are some really simple things too. I often will use this example when this is a long time ago, when I worked for a company, the last company I worked for had been working on a really big project for about 9 months. We were finally at the point where delivering to the executive team that was coming from out of town, very, very exciting. That morning, and the meeting was scheduled for early morning. That morning, my babysitter didn't show up. Right. And so I was not able to present because I didn't get there in time. And so thinking about that, like something so simple as thinking about when are you scheduling critical meetings? Are you doing it for times, right? Are you centering caregivers, right? And times of day where that drop off, the pick, that whole thing is happening. Very simple, but if we keep using a system that is early mornings, late afternoons, those are the hustlers, right? Those are the people that really care. We'll never change the numbers, right? Because I'm not the only one that something like that has happened to.
Right. And, that's a really interesting example too, because we can move those times.
Absolutely.
And that is such an intentional design when it comes to how do we design inclusive meetings, right? Number one is looking at the time. Like, is this being inclusive of everybody who needs to be here at the moment, right? And centering that the most marginalized in this situation is the mother who needs to have flexibility around daycare, right? So it's an interesting example because that's part of the beauty of design is that the conditions can change. And your most marginalized group can look different from company to company or from situation to situation. And I want to come back to kind of another thing that you said earlier that I think is important to mention at this moment, right? And it's that we can't wait until we have a full team on board to design these situations. It has to be really at the startup stage, ideally, right? And if a company
so much easier if you do it, if you bake it into how you exist.
Exactly, because you're baking it into the values and the culture of the organization. So that is another part of intentional design is do it as soon as possible. Do not wait until there's ideal conditions. Like you are creating those ideal conditions or those conditions for what I call belonging, right? You're designing for belonging rather than waiting until there's a perfect time. There will never be a perfect time.
Ever.
So hey, you have a situation that just came up. All right, let's huddle around. What does design look like for this particular situation? And guess what? Those practices might be beneficial for all. And they are absolutely critical for that team member or several team members to be able to just thrive in that workspace.
So one of the things that I'd love for you to share, right? So it's thinking about this from a systems level, centering the most marginalized. Let's talk then about change management, because one of the approaches that you take that I think people can really learn from is it's almost like a series of sprints.
Mhm.
So what would you how would you recommend people tackle? Because sometimes it's like, this is just too big, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
where do we start? I'm going to throw up my hands because it just feels impossible.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest disconnects, especially with DIB work, is that people think it's going to be fast.
Yeah,
And that is the number one. It's a thought error. We think it's supposed to be fast. And when it doesn't happen, when we don't get results, we say, see, it didn't work.
didn't work.
Didn't
Should've
work. We tried it. Too bad. It didn't work. Right. So my approach is very different. I look at it, what are the three most important things? So I'll do an audit. Oftentimes when I go into a space, sometimes I can automatically, just from interacting with several people, kind of pick up on that, right? But I'm also a scientist. So I have to really take a step back and say, what is the key question, right? Are we designing spaces for belonging? Do we have people leaving the company? So maybe the issues that are popping up might be different from situation to situation. So taking a step back and saying, what are the most pressing issues here? And then looking at who are the key stakeholders, right? Asking employees, asking managers, asking directors, whatever that structure you have, right? And if
so define, right, I think there's some of this for large organizations, right? They might have a whole change management department.
Yes,
all these things, but for you, right, it's collect some data.
Yes, collect some data. And I call it an audit. I'm not sure if that's the best word, but let me take a look under the hood. Let me see what you have going on. Let me see your current system and try to map that out, because we might see that there is a reason why people are leaving right away. They come in, they stay for 1-2 months, boom, they're out. Or maybe they stay even for a year, right? But there's something in the system that is pushing them out. It is intentionally working that way. Mm-hmm. So can we look under the hood and say, your onboarding was fine, but then the moment they got comfortable, then something happens. Okay, so then we focus on that. What does that look like? And it might be, my manager doesn't hear me out. Like, any suggestion I give is just put to the wayside as if like, this is how we do it, deal with it, kind of thing, right? So then the question is,
and that's only happening to certain populations.
Perhaps, right? So the patterns, we look for patterns. And so then if we identify that as one of the key patterns, then we'll say, okay, what does design look like for this pattern, right? And we'll bring a group of people, because I typically work with companies that are 100 employees or more, because I want a dynamic group of people who are committed. One person cannot do it, but I do work on helping people see their own mind and what they're creating. I do make sure I incorporate that, because oftentimes we get in our own way and we are the ones believing these stories. I'm thinking, I automatically excluded myself from so many opportunities because I literally thought I don't belong here. So there is work to be done there, but right now we're talking about the system, right? So what I'll do is I'll look at, okay, what does it mean? And an easy example is, if a person is not heard, what are the systems what does that mean to them, first of all? And if it's a pattern, what does it mean to the multiple people? And then say, could we design for that? For belonging in this space, right? What does it look like? Is it meeting structure? Is it flexibility in time? Is it this? And so then we'll take one thing, such as meeting structure is a good example. Does everybody get to contribute? Are your voices heard? And then we check, yes, this meeting, everybody contributed, the voices were heard. Or yes, we were able to stay focused on whatever that was. Whatever it is, the tactic, we take a deep dive. So we'll take that one thing. In the recommendations, there might be 3 to 5 things, but if we were focused on 3 to 5 things, we don't get anything done, because then it becomes shallow. So we pretty much take one and go a mile deep, and then say, we're going to focus on creating better spaces, designing intentionally for meetings, and making sure that there's an outcome that aligns with our goals. So then we'll focus on that for a sprint, a 12-week sprint or so. And 12 weeks sounds like a long time, but the reality is we're already at the end of March, right? So you can imagine that it's already been 12 weeks. And we're getting kind of to the April timeline. So that's a good example of how taking a deep dive and then checking in every week and saying, okay, did we do it? Did we not do it? And this goes back to micro habits, atomic habits. You've heard that concept, just like weight loss, right? We all know how to do it.
That's what the app is built
exactly.
on. Right? Like that is exactly what we're doing. Nudge, 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 nudge.
And then checking, we provide tools in the meantime, because 12 weeks is a long time. It's like, are you kidding me? You're just going to be checking off to see if we do things or not? No, we're building capacity. So for example, if there are glitches in the system, says, you know what, people are not sticking to it. Okay, Do they need to learn about atomic habits, right? Do they need to learn about conflict? It's like, oh, people are just ignoring or staying quiet. They won't even say anything. They won't even talk in meetings. Okay, what are some of those issues that come up? And what we have is workshops, trainings, even coaching for small groups to be able to communicate with one another, because oftentimes it's the perception, right? Belonging is a thought, it's an idea, it's a feeling in your body. So when I say I don't belong, there were conditions around that happened. I made it mean that I don't belong, right? And sometimes they're blatant. Racism exists, not to count that. Exclusion exists, right? So there is you were not invited, that is a circumstance. What you make that mean, it's up to you, right? And could we as a workplace create conditions for belonging to make sure that we don't exclude intentionally, right? That where we actually say, you know what, everybody's voice, we are here in this meeting because we could not do it without all of you. Otherwise, it's an email, so don't even bother, right? So that's the idea that we dive deep and then make sure that there's accountability and support to make sure that people get out of their own way.
So as y'all are thinking about this, right, what Dr. Garcia just laid out is a framework for assessing, right, identifying, really honing in on the high impact, and then having accountability, right? Focus, check-ins along the way. You've got key stakeholders, right? Really thinking about influence, change, right? The fundamentals of change management are how you actually redesign systems for the outcomes that you want.
Absolutely.
And I just really appreciate that. Don't try and do 8 things. Pick the high impact, pick where you are trying to make change. And you might have to, at the end of that 12 weeks, go into a second sprint on that same issue, focused on different elements, right? So I think that that's also key. And as you said, the 12 weeks go by very quickly.
They do. And the interesting thing about, because it is a change management, it's also a different way of just creating awareness to how your mind works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we were talking about bias earlier. We're all biased, yes, right? But one of the strongest bias we have is confirmation bias.
Absolutely.
And we want to look for things and say, see, I knew
it.
Right.
We made a good decision.
Which upholds certain structural inequalities, right? Inequities too. But it also is an opportunity for us to disrupt, to say, oh, I'm thinking this way because that's confirmation bias. And I'm supposed to, like, my mind automatically wants to do this. The question is that what I want, right?
What's interesting is one of the things that we have in the app is around inclusive decision making. And to interrupt that confirmation bias and some of the privilege that comes with power, not some of the privilege that comes with right where you are on the food chain, is the person that is advocating most strongly for a decision actually has to poke holes in it. Right, here are the 10 reasons why this is a terrible decision, right? And everybody has to go through that process, and you have to do that, right, to interrupt that. We're all on board, we're all excited. Yes, this is the best thing. Is it?
Right. Or are we perpetuating the same inequities we're trying to disrupt, right?
Yeah.
Because it's easier. I mean, and I gotta say, white women are the #1 example. It is easier to be a white woman who stays silent than to say something, because you might lose some of those advantages that are automatically kind of pushed down to other vulnerable populations,
100%.
Yeah.
100%, right? Like, what is that? Everybody in this community knows, right? One of my mantras is spend your privilege, right? And
share the wealth.
Not going away. So
yeah.
I knew this was going to be a fantastic conversation, Dr. Garcia. We covered a ton of ground. I would love for you to leave me with one last truth bomb about kind of whether it is applying the best of scientific thought to change in DEIB, or whatever it may be. Leave me with your mic drop.
Oh my goodness, it's always a tough one because there's so many, but I think that I recently have to tell you, I lost like 30 pounds. But it was going back to those micro habits, right? And I think the power really lies in everyday decisions, just like you say, right? And actually doing something about it and saying, you know, am I creating a culture of belonging? Am I creating a culture of othering? Right? Am I intentionally including people or intentionally excluding people? We talk about this as hidden biases, but the reality is that we can bring them to the forefront of our brain and actually say we make decisions every day and we choose which one we advance.
Love, 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 love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your brilliance. Really appreciate it. We'll put information about how you can get in touch with Dr. Garcia in the chat. And in the meantime, y'all get out there and do the next right thing. We will see you next week on Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Thanks so much.
Thank you.